All right. Good morning, everyone. Can I just get a thumbs up online if you can hear me? Okay, great. Welcome back to Turbine Talks. This is part 2 on end of life pathways for wind energy assets. It is a pleasure to see some of you again, and welcome to those who are joining us for the first time in our 2-part series. My name is Mafiwa Ramalebana. I'm the Communication and Design Specialist at SAWEA, and I will be facilitating today's session. Just for context, those who are not with us in part 1, on Tuesday, we gained some valuable international perspectives on this topic, learning how recycling and repurposing are being approached globally. And today, for part 2, we're going to bring the conversation home and focus on the South African context, unpacking regulatory frameworks, engineering considerations, and closure practices that will shape how we manage turbine end of life locally. And I believe that together, these perspectives, global and local, will give us a complete picture on what we need to build a truly sustainable wind energy future. Before we begin, I just want to give a quick reminder for our housekeeping rules. The first is please keep your microphones muted during the presentations and while others are speaking on the line. You are most welcome to pose your questions and comments in the Q&A section. We will capture them and bring them into the discussion at the end of both, or well, 3 presentations today. And both part 1 and part 2 recordings and presentations will be shared with attendees afterwards. And just a reminder that the recordings will also be available on SAWEA's YouTube channel. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Mishelle Govender, who is the Chief Director at the Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and the Environment. She takes care of the Hazardous Waste Management and Licensing Department. Mishelle has more than 22 years of experience in environmental management, particularly in waste management. She serves as South Africa's Basel Convention focal point and was recently appointed Vice Chairperson of the International Compliance Committee for the Basel Convention, representing the African continent. Her portfolio includes waste licensing, land remediation, and management of hazardous waste streams. And today she will provide the regulatory policy framework guiding extended producer responsibility and waste management in South Africa. Mishelle, when you are ready, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mafiwa, and thank you, colleagues, and thank you to SAWEA for the invitation. I just had my camera on so that you know that I'm not a robot and that I am actually a person. And I will put it off just to save some bandwidth and I will share my presentation. I'm hoping it's in presentation mode, and I will continue. So thank you again. Thanks, Mafiwa, for that confirmation. Thank you again for the opportunity. I've been looking forward to this. And in line with the theme for this webinar on global lessons and on what is our local readiness and what are we doing when the wind energy assets become defunct or are now post-consumer about in good compliance in terms of wind energy assets. So we've got a very extensive waste legislative environment within the country. And we're one of the most progressive countries in the world in terms of incorporating the environmental right in the Constitution, which basically says every person that lives in this country has the right to an environment that is not harmful to their health and well-being, and that departments like ours, are tasked with ensuring that legislative right through environmental legislation and other measures. And so we call the mother of all of our acts. And from there, we have the Waste Act, which is a specific environmental act and on waste generation, waste being dealt with, and also to a large extent now the buzzword is circularity. And I'll talk to that in a little bit, which is implemented. And from that strategy, we prioritize a number of initiatives. And the strategy at the moment, colleagues, we've had this strategy for almost 5 years. And we are going through a review process. So it is an opportunity for colleagues on this call to input into the National Waste Management Strategy, because it's kind of and then of course, what is the 5-year horizon looking like? And I must admit that in that strategy, we are enhancing EPR, or extended producer responsibility, to take it forward. So I'll talk to that a little later as well. Under the Waste Act, we've also got numerous regulations and norms and standards. The norms and standards are basically is to make it easy for applicants to legislation, so that we don't always need to appoint a consultant, because that is costly. And we're saying where we can assist by putting norms and standards in place, we will do that. So well, people need to do is register.
Pardon, Mishelle?
Norms and standards, and then comply with it. There are Vincent, am I good to carry on?
Yes, you can carry on. There's just a break in the communication, so I'm not sure if you're in the position to potentially change internet or the Wi-Fi that's feeding into it. The line comes and goes continuously.
Okay, let me do that. Apologies, I am at the office and sometimes the signal isn't the best. So let me quickly just change my internet setting.
Thank you, Mishelle.
And I will be good to go again. Okay, I'm hoping you can still hear me, Vincent.
We can still hear you now. It sounds clear. Maybe if we continue, we'll inform if there's any break in the communication or line again. Thank you.
Oh, okay, perfect. All right, I've switched networks, and hopefully we can go ahead. Okay, so moving on, and colleagues, this should not be the first and only time that you hear me talking about this. If there's some point of interest, my contact details will be shared with you, and we could have this conversation going forward. So I think I want to just zoom into the three at the bottom, or rather, let me start with the waste classification and management regulations. What this basically guides us with is to classify the waste in terms of whether it is hazardous, non-hazardous, the degree of hazardousness or toxicity when it comes to certain constituents. And this helps define how waste streams are managed, handled, and then an assessment is done in terms of whether they can be disposed of or not. Now, we came up with the national norms and standards in terms of disposal of waste to landfill in 2013. And the reason I mentioned this is in 2013 already, we made a call as government that electronic and electrical waste will not go to landfill because there is value, but there's also a high risk in terms of contamination with heavy metals like cadmium, boron, cobalt, those kinds of things that are within electronic and electrical systems. And so since 2013 already, we banned waste electrical and electronic equipment from going to landfill, but we phased it in so that people had an opportunity and time frame to do this. And I'll come to it later because in 2022 it's all over now. No E or no we can go to landfill. And then in 2020 we came up with the EPR regulations, which basically pushes the onus on producers to ensure that they don't just put products on the market and then forget about it, and take the profits and go. So we're saying if you put products in the market as a producer, you would have to take responsibility for when that material becomes waste. And so in line with that philosophy, which is being implemented the world over, we put out notices relating to, first we put out the regulations in 2020, and then we followed that up with target notices for specific waste streams like I'm going to say we, colleagues, as it's widely accepted. And then, of course, recently, as in August this year, we put out or promulgated a WE policy for implementation. So it's basically just taking the EPR regulations and enhancing them and taking them further because we want a really good closed loop in terms of dealing with WE. So this is the total ban that as of August 2022. Okay, so let me just give some context, and colleagues, don't lose me here because I'm going to get to the point of why I'm raising all of this and how this is related to wind energy assets. So the e-waste challenge in the country and in the world is huge. As I've indicated, e-waste it's got hazardous toxic chemicals, it's got flame retardants, so materials in there that are extremely harmful to environment, and if they're not handled properly, they could
the incorrect branch.
Sorry.
Apologies. Can we just all mute our mics? Apologies, Mishelle.
Okay, thank you. So if those materials are not handled properly, and if they're not understood in terms of what the makeup is, they could have an effect on human health as well. So, and e-waste is a global problem, colleagues. It's a waste stream that's growing exponentially. And you and I know that when when our phones reach that 2-year limit, it suddenly starts having issues. And then what do? We try and fix it where we can, and if we can't, it's in the bin. It's going to waste. And now countries in like South Africa and Africa as a continent, we need to have measures in place to deal with this, or else we will be struggling. So you can see the stats here that globally there's 62 million tons, it's estimated, of WEEE that was generated. And out of this 62 million tons, 48 million has been disposed of, and some of it incorrectly. So, for example, your phone doesn't work, you throw it in the black bin and it's gone into municipal space. Now, that there causes problems, because if it was separated, one could refurbish it, one could reuse it, separate it nicely. But once it's mixed with oil and grease and a whole lot of other things, it becomes contaminated, and it's a lot more difficult to recycle or to reuse. And so basically the level of collection and recycling globally is at 22%. And here in South Africa, we generate about 360,000 tons per year. And that figure is an old figure. It needs to be revised. We're working on it. But recycling is less than 10% here in South Africa. And I'm saying that this could be improved. So we've got poor handling, mismanagement, inadequate recycling, there's illegal treatment practices, and all of this basically increases the waste generated in this from this products stream, and we need to deal with it. So, as I indicated, we've got a strong constitution, and in South Africa, we need to manage that, to uphold that constitution. So we've got the strategy, which is basically highlighting WEEE as an essential waste stream to manage. We are busy with a circular economy strategy and action plan, which is basically what we do. Historically, what we've done is we've taken from the earth, we've made a product, and then and then we get waste, and that's disposed of. Now we're saying we got to relook at circularity. When you take something from the earth, how are you taking it? Is it in a responsible manner? Are you designing your products for maximum recyclability? Are you designing for ease of reuse and refurbishment? And then when you use it, do you have, can you rework this, put that into a beneficiation stream? And in that way, we've got a minimal amount of residual waste that needs to be dealt with. So these are the things that we're looking at. And we are dealing with it from a legislative angle, but I think also from on the ground, there are a lot of businesses and facilities that see the value of circularity, because you don't need to buy new things all the time when you can refurbish and reuse. And I'll come to that when I deal with the specific wind turbine issues. An important thing that I've also mentioned, there's a ban. And then, of course, what we're trying to do is promote cradle to cradle. So let's come now into the wind sector. And this is one of the things I wanted to highlight, is the reason I've been talking about e-waste and is because in your wind turbines, there are electrical and electronic components. And by virtue of that being in the wind asset, the wind asset is actually classified as E, and any waste coming from that is classified as WEEE. And that is why I'm speaking to you now. So a little bit, I think I may be preaching to the converted. So basically, we're some history is that in South Africa, our large-scale wind farms are about 20 years, close to 25 years now. Started in 2011, 2012. We've got 34 operational farms, and I know there are plans for more on the cards at the moment. We're generating a huge amount of electricity. Most of these wind farms are owned by IPPs or independent power producers. And in all of this, there's a calculation that is being used here. So we believe there's in excess of 1,500 turbines across the country. And we know that those turbines can last between 15 and 30 years. And of course, we know that, you know, when a part of a blade gets damaged, there is this, you know, removal or repair to that. And so because of that, and because of the longevity of the turbines, we have no records right now of turbines that have come out of operation, nor what has happened to the ones that did come out, if it's just one blade. So that is something that is a gap that needs to be filled, and we're looking into that. So here's what I was saying before. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this other than to say that because of the electronics and the sensors and the software within the wind turbine, this is classified as electronic and electrical equipment. And I just added, you know, some of the other sections like the rotor blades and what they're made of, or the nacelle, and to point out that almost all of these materials here, your fiberglass, your steel, aluminum, your concrete, all of this could be reused and recycled. So maybe the only one that may have a bit of a problem would be your composites. But even that, there are potential solutions, and that's the thinking behind circularity, is that you don't need to, if you've already built a wind turbine, you know, start from scratch. So find a way to reuse those materials that would come out of this. So I want to maybe just also add here that extended producer responsibility, remember I said started in 2020, or we promulgated in 2020. But colleagues, I was in a Windaba conference on the 26th of October 2020. And this is long before, or just a week or two before the EPR regulations were promulgated. And I at that stage said, I need to come in because the wind sector needs to be brought on board in terms of EPR, and they need to understand EPR and its implications for the wind sector. And that presentation was shared with the SAWEA. And I did that presentation saying, colleagues, this is what is coming. Please prepare yourself for it. I know that your blades, your wind turbines are only probably going to become waste around 2025, 2027, thereabouts, and longer if the blades are, or the turbines are well taken care of and maintained. And I said, don't wait for the last minute and then you caught napping. So that was my intention. And like I said, a week or two later, the EPR was promulgated, but we also delayed that implementation, and we said implementation of these regulations will only begin in November 2021. Again, I came back to Windaba in 2023 and basically sat on a panel discussion talking about life beyond the wind. That was what the title was. And so why I raised this is this is not new. I've been in this space with SAWEA, educating, advocating, and pushing people to think about what needs to happen in the future. And colleagues, one of the things I must just point out is I'm the one that issues licenses for waste disposal sites, hazardous waste disposal sites. And I said in the Windaba conferences and every engagement I've had, the answer is no. So if the answer is no, you must ask, what is that question? And the question that I said no to is we are not going to build hazardous waste landfill sites for wind turbines, for solar PV, for batteries. It's not happening because we don't have space as a country. We need to protect our environment, and there is value in recycling and recovering the materials from this equipment? So if the answer you've known since 2020 is no, that then says what happened? What did the sector do in terms of finding solutions to the wind turbines? So we do not want to dig and bury, but I'll raise some of these issues a little later as well. So in the regulations itself, there are several requirements, and I've just put it down. And like I said, you can always liaise with me, but there are certain things that are an absolute must. Registration must happen. So any producer, and a producer, colleagues, is the one who manufactures the equipment, or in cases where the equipment is not managed in South Africa, the one who brings it into South Africa is classified as a producer in terms of this legislation. So the obligations on the producers are that they must register with the DFFE, they must either join a PRO or a producer responsibility organization. So it's basically an organization that does the work for you as a producer, but the responsibility sits with you. You can either join an existing PRO, and there are quite a few in terms of the WE space, and you can see this on our website, or if you establish your own EPR scheme, that is also accepted as long as you follow the requirements in terms of the legislation. So the product classification, we had different products. There are 6 waste streams at the moment, which we're dealing with, and E is one of them. The financial contributions is you have to pay an EPR fee to the PRO based on your product volume. And I know this is something that has come up, and I'll come to it in a little bit, but I understand your product is long lasting, but you have to pay that fee so that when that product becomes waste, that there is a solution. So the solutions have to be found now. So there has to be this budget for compliance, a budget for recycling costs, which needs to be factored up front. Reporting, of course, there's regular reports that need to be submitted to the DFFE in terms of performance. One needs to maintain records and have an audit trail. We are pushing people to design better, to design for reuse, repair. If the design and construction is not happening in the country, we've got to influence this through our international platforms to ensure that there's environmental labeling on products as well, to inform consumers and to provide them with better opportunities to choose what they do and what they can accept. We promote consumer awareness is something that needs to happen. So the sector and the PROs need to do this. And of course, in terms of waste management, to ensure that there is no WE that becomes that ends up in landfills. And when and we have recyclers within the country, quite a few of them that are licensed and are also on the SAWEA or website of the department. So that's the South African Waste Information Center. And so this WE must only go to licensed recyclers and transporters. I think this one is a duplicate here. I'm not sure why, but so since we've promulgated the regulations, we've had PROs that have emerged, and they are helping producers meet the compliance obligations. I know that the wind sector and the solar sector have already started discussions with the PROs. And some of the questions or the concerns that have come up is that, look, the wind equipment becomes waste after about 20, 25 years. So we're not even there as a country at the moment. How is this paid? Do you pay once off or not? And then what happens to the money? Because the money is only needed in 20 years. How is it held? Till it's needed, where is it kept? And what does that compliance at end of life look like? So these are all questions that have surfaced and are receiving airtime in terms of discussions so that we could collectively between government, the PROs and the producers come up with solutions where we don't have graveyards of wind turbines somewhere in the Northern Cape or in the Eastern Cape. That is not what we want to happen. So we're encouraging PROs to find solutions, and that's how the money is being used or will be used, because while we know that we don't necessarily have a big industry in terms of fiberglass, for example, recycling. But I've seen facilities in Cape Town last week or this week, earlier this week, that can actually recycle this. So we need to just give people an opportunity as well to develop these secondary markets. And that is something that I discussed in previous webinars and conferences as well, is that we need to do the thinking, the planning, and the implementation now, so that in 20 years, we've got a fully fledged system of recovery, recycling happening, and that we don't then at that point ask that we want to dig a hole and bury, or we just want to store it indefinitely in some sort of heap. So, colleagues, there are huge opportunities here, and part of EPR is promoting that inclusive we value chain. And so in our country where the economy is very bad at the moment and we're struggling, this provides an opportunity as well for employment at various levels. So right down to from the informal all the way to formal recycling. And waste pickers play a huge role in this as well. So there are opportunities, and collectively, when we're harnessing all of these we fractions, we must ensure that the environment is protected and people are protected. And of course, we must isolate and treat those items that I talked about, like cobalt and cadmium and all of that. Within these we structures, we've got to remove it. We must be able to do it, and we follow best practical environmental options in terms of this and its relevance to the waste sector. So just basically following due process. Again, like I said, it could unlock jobs through the circularity that we're expecting. And globally, now what we're seeing is that countries around the world are adopting WE-specific regulations, which has led us to our EPR framework and the WE policy that's there. And obviously, following the polluter pays principle. So this is an important aspect. I've talked about the informal sector and including them. And basically what we're saying is that this policy that we've developed must create opportunities within the country as to use this we as secondary resources. I know some of you might have been here on Tuesday and heard about maybe mining we. So you mine the we that's created to extract precious metals, and it is happening in the country. So there is gold, there is platinum in the we, which could be extracted and put back into circulation, and so it's very important. The training and upskilling of workers throughout this value chain is extremely important because that is how we are going to be able to move forward. So last bit of a number of slides here is we want to strengthen the legislation. We are very new in terms of implementation, but as we implement, we want to grow and we want to develop those value chains and the capacity. We want to create a level playing field in this regard, support technology development for extraction of material. We want to encourage research and development because we could become a center of excellence for Africa when it comes to this material and we. So essentially, colleagues, the way forward in this regard is we need to strengthen the collection of information on these e-producers and the we footprint in the country. We need to continuously talk and develop measures to implement the we targets in the notices. We need to develop norms and standards relating to the environmentally sound management of we, and that is purely because going through an EIA process is expensive. So we've got to be able to make this as easy as possible. We need to strengthen enforcement. We have done enforcement in the sector, and we are strengthening it. We're integrating the informal sector, the waste pickers, and of course, the cost of treatment and recycling of WEEE must be transparent. So you can't be paying 6 cents per kg or per ton for collection and recycling when in fact the cost may be like 10 rand a ton. So by the time it becomes when we need it to be recycled, then we can't pay for it. So another aspect is we need to have the collaboration between government departments like the DTIC and the DMPR, the Department of Electricity and Energy, and we need to continue to strengthen EPR. So colleagues, I will stop there. I know I've given a very broad overview, but I thought this would help, and I will leave my contact details so that you can contact me. Thank you, colleagues, and back to you, Mafiwa.
Thank you so much, Mishelle. I think I speak for everyone when I say that we appreciate this very detailed presentation that you've given us just now, and just learning the difference between E and we. I think for me, that was definitely a lesson for the day. But we appreciate the perspective on regulation and compliance, which I think will help us understand the direction that our country is moving in, and what it means for the wind sector. I think I saw some comments on the chat, but for all the attendees, please do remember to use the Q&A section just to capture your comments and questions, and then we will address them at the end of the session. But once again, thank you so much, Mishelle, for the wonderful presentation. We will then move over to our second speaker for the day, Mr. Declan Morkel, who is a renewable energy engineer at DNV. Declan delivers technical due diligence and advisory services across the full lifecycle of wind, solar PV, battery storage, and hybrid energy projects. His work supports lenders, developers, and IPPs with bankable insights that guide investment decisions and project success. At DNV, his responsibilities span procurement support, technology and design review, construction monitoring with milestone verification, grid integration analysis, and risk identification. He has contributed to transactions valued at more than $1.5 billion and supported projects totaling over 1 gigawatt across sub-Saharan Africa. Today, Declan will share the engineering considerations and practical solutions for end-of-life planning, linking technology with long-term financial and operational sustainability. Declan, when you are ready, the floor is yours.
Morning, Mafiwa. Morning, all.
Morning.
Let me just get my window up.
All right, no problem. Thank you. We can see your presentation.
Right. Good morning, all. Thanks for joining. It's always nice to be back at a SAWEA event. As introduced, I'm Declan Morkel. I'm representing Energy Systems, and today we'll be going through repowering options for onshore wind farms reaching maturity. Today I'll just be covering context, why to consider repowering now, the potential options behind repowering, the advantages and potential conditions for repowering, some global case studies, and then some key considerations here in South Africa. Then I think I've included some Q&A, but we can move that through to later in the slide in the session. Quickly, just some background to DNV. We are one of the world's largest advisory and certification bodies. Every year we are involved in the wind sector from turbine inspections, operational EYAs, technical due diligences, and we have offices all around the world. And the content that you're seeing here is from some of our offices in more development markets where you see options that they typically consider regarding repowering. Besides for wind, and we also work in the solar and BESS sectors from feasibility, development, construction, commissioning, and operations. And I'm sure that most of the developers and IPPs here in the call are familiar with our work. And we have worked on many projects in South Africa from the beginning of REAP. And I think now, I guess it's important to consider the topic of repowering and maybe just looking at projects in South Africa that might be considered. I think if you look at the bid window 1 and 2 plants, the bid window 1 plants totaling about 620 megawatts, all primarily reached COD in 2014 or early 2015, and the bid window 2 plants reaching COD in 2015 and 2016. I think this shows the age of these plants, the total capacities that we're looking at, and I think it's important to consider that these plants probably have turbines in the 2 to 3 megawatt range. And today we're probably looking at turbines in the 5 to 6 megawatt range. And by the time these plants reach end of life, it'll probably be even higher. And this shows you these first plants are in their midlife in their design cycle. They may be, and I don't think we've seen this yet in our operational assessments, but they may soon begin to experience some declining performance, increased maintenance costs, especially as their PPAs are moving towards expiry in the next decade. And as I've already stated, the turbines are probably now technically outdated and will become more outdated as time goes. Internationally, we see 4 main pathways for asset owners. There'll be a life extension, partial repowering, full repowering, and hybridization. I'll go into detail in each of those in the next slides. And that's basically the tool pack that asset owners and developers can start to consider for projects looking forward. There are some large benefits to repowering, and I think we'll cover those in more detail as we go through. And I think when we go through these repowering options, it's important to consider what really suits your facility best. So the first option would be life extension, and that's prolonging the useful life of an asset, and where necessary, implementing targeted upgrades. And this focuses primarily on maximizing the residual life of existing turbines and infrastructure. And the wind facility owners will know that it's basically continuing ongoing maintenance that existed and upping that maintenance until really it no longer makes sense. You're looking at blade repairs, gearbox refurbishments, tower integrity testing, and the key limit to lifetime extension is really structural integrity of the wind turbine. You may be able to repair blades and do ongoing maintenance, but once structural integrity starts to become a risk, you're really looking at the full end of life. Some of this is attractive to owners as really, in a South African context, looking at these REAP projects, it'll just be sourcing a new off-taker who's willing to take that risk of repowering, and it's comparatively a low risk, and there'll be lots of existing data to support a decision like this. Next, you would look at what we term partial repowering. So this is upgrading and not necessarily replacing key components. So you're looking at the same components, blades, generators, gearboxes, nacelles, but you'll retain existing foundations and towers. This is quite popular in North America, where you see asset owners and developers upgrading blades to increase swept area or upgrading gearboxes, and that's quite facilitated by their permitting process. You'll see higher yields and probably lower O&M expenditure, as you've obviously had a higher capex to replace the components that are having trouble. And again, internationally, you see off-takers then renegotiate or PPAs be renegotiated to account for this increase. I don't think you'll see this in a South African setting, and we'll get into that more later. And this is a bit more of a balanced risk profile. The operational data from the existing site can then really be leveraged to try and get some improved performance. The next option would be full repowering. So that's rebuilding with modern high capacity turbines As I stated earlier, previously you're looking at 2 to 3 megawatts, potentially lower, and modern turbines are on the range of 5 to 7 megawatts. We may see this go up by the time these projects reach the end of life. And this is a way to maximize production, and it's the way to the most significantly increase output, lower your cost per megawatt, but you still retain the advantage of an existing grid connection, existing and potentially existing land permits. Again, these projects will look to recontract under different contracting mechanisms, and as a recurring point, they'll still benefit from the existing data on site. Lastly, I think an option that we're seeing that's becoming more popular internationally, and we're starting to see developers look at this in the African context, is to look at hybridization. So then at existing wind assets, you'll integrate solar PV and or BESS, and that really is looking at a way to maximize your grid capacity utilization, provide dispatchable output. And we're seeing projects in Africa and the Middle East actually look to create 24/7 baseload dispatchable plants through hybrid projects like this. And it also creates opportunity for new revenue streams, ancillary services, capacity payments. I think with the wholesale energy market coming into play, this is something that asset owners will also begin to consider and look at. It creates more diversified revenues, and it can prevent some of the risks for curtailment. And I think it's really quite an exciting option. And going through all of these, then that's really the toolkit that you have at hand when you're considering repowering. But I think it's then important to consider the potential advantages and maybe the conditions, what we're looking at under repowering. So as I've already touched on, plants that have been running have the advantage of years of SCADA meteorological data maintenance, and it really allows for comprehensive baseline. It reduces risk as we can see really how this plant is performing. And when you consider the options through, especially lifetime extension, you can have a better understanding of performance compared to PPAs that are obviously structured with pre-financial close data. You might also have the option to increase your digitization and really look to monitor underperformance from an early perspective and see what direction your operational asset is looking at. I think permitting and land considerations in South African context is obviously critical. And we see in more established markets such as Germany and Spain, repowering is provided simplified environmental and spatial planning procedures, as most of the impacts have already been completed. And if you're looking at obviously full repowering, you will have less turbines, so your environmental impact, especially from an avian perspective, may be reduced. You can look at some of the other options, shutdown on demand, blade painting on new installations or upgrades, and you can actually look at mitigating your impact compared to your baseline. Typically, we see that repowered projects internationally have shorter approval periods due to these incremental changes. And you always have the option of renegotiating existing land leases, servitudes, way leaves. And this would often be an upside then for owners that are already involved who might have seen that their income sources from these projects are something they rely on, and now they thought they would no longer be an option. I think it's also critical that you can look at access roads, substations. If you're looking at lifetime extension or partial repowering, foundations can still be reused. So there's lots of technical options when you're looking at what's already existing on the facility. And I think you'll also see that the projects have an established community relationship, the work that they're doing in communities, and those relationships can then continue rather coming to their end of life also. I think if you look at grid, this is one of the critical points in the South African renewable energy market, is grid congestion and the lack of grid. I think especially in windy areas. And these existing assets will have the option to continue to connect at those points. And internationally, we see they're given preferred grid connection and queue, and basically they get to skip the queue. They're already connected. The process for this in South Africa hasn't been codified or created, as obviously this is a ways from happening. But I think if you can retain these grid connections, it's a massive benefit to projects that are looking to repower. Especially if you consider doing hybrid plants, you can get more out of your grid connection. And these projects, especially these REAP projects, maybe they can look at going into the private market and entering wheeling frameworks. Maybe they might have an advantage in the wholesale market. If they understand their power curves, it can help them with bidding and understanding their costs, especially compared to new build plants. And really, we see internationally in mature portfolios, repowering is a powerful value creation lever. So you can combine some of the benefits of new technologies with existing infrastructure. Your construction environmental risks are often lower than green builds. So from a risk perspective, not just during construction, but also from an energy yield perspective, risks are reduced, and financiers are always happy with that. It also lines up very well with the discussion from my esteemed colleagues on thinking about recycling. So I guess this would be the reuse step of the reduce, reuse, recycle. And it also allows for potentially lower carbon footprints, as there's already assets that have been used. And those emissions will basically get a longer life. I think if you look at Germany, which is a key case study, in 2025, 35% of capacity in the wind market was brought online through repowering. And in our next slide, you'll see that over the years, this has really increased. Germany's onshore wind capacity is significantly higher than ours. It's about 65 gigawatts in mid-2025. And I think if you consider the public projects in South Africa, they're in the region of 3.4 gigawatts. And there's quite a large number of private projects that are in construction. And in Germany, you see that the average plant life is around 15 years, and then you start to see repowering. I think, as we've already discussed, the public projects maybe don't have this option, but private projects, I think it'll be interesting to see when it starts to take place in South Africa. And it takes about 27 months for these projects to come through in Germany, which is slower than it had been, but I think it still shows you that it's a reasonable time period if you consider some of the development times we see in South Africa. And in Germany, repowering means full repowering, full replacement. And as we've discussed, this is better land use, more powerful turbines, reduced environmental impact. And I think you see this benefit in the German market really because they've simplified the permitting process, and they're really encouraging this from a policy perspective. This slide is in German, but basically what it's showing is that that percentage dot is the percentage of projects that have come online that are repowered projects. And I think you can really see that it's a significant part of their market, significant capacity. And I think if we can get this right in South Africa, I think it will show that there's lots of residual value to those projects that have already been constructed and already in place. And I think then it's important to think about the South African context and what do we expect to impact South Africa here, and what are the key considerations? As we've already discussed, the bid window 1 projects are in their half-life. That's kind of aligning with times that we would see in Europe, but I don't think we'll begin to see that. And as you all know, these projects are concentrated in the Western Cape, Eastern Cape, Northern Cape, in our windy areas, and this has led to lots of congestion in these areas. I guess here we get to the sticking point for repowering before before the end of the PPA term is that the REAP PPAs restrict any material change to plant design, turbine model, or layout during the 20-year term. So I think for these projects, we're really looking at potential life extension and those options coming at the end of the term. But I think if you consider that we're almost in 2026, it's the development horizon for these plants is starting to come. And the only way this could be changed would be if there's an agreement or an amendment between Eskom and the IPP office. And I think obviously that's quite a considerable amount of work to go through that, especially if you consider that most of these early projects really have favorable tariffs. I think we'll see these projects probably reach their end of life, and then we'll see what happens from there. But I think then you start to see at the end of life, with all of this additional operational data, hybridization or full repowering really becomes economically compelling, because you can really look to fully utilize that grid connection, and you can really maximize value. And I think also at that time, the wholesale energy market will be in play, and those projects can start to really see how to be involved in that if they don't negotiate private PPAs directly with off-takers. And I think this is, I guess, the next key policy point is we'll have to see the stance that the DFFE take on re-permitting on existing sites. And to my understanding, and I stand under correction from our colleagues on the call, that there isn't a process for this yet in South Africa, because those EIAs are tied to the life of the facility and the technology that's on site. But I think it's a conversation that maybe we can start to begin, similar to the recycling conversation. And I think there's a huge amount of benefit. We've already gone through the benefits with the community, reduced environmental impact. And I think then the next key point will be the negotiation of land lease and land leases, or understanding that if we can simplify this process, it really will encourage developers to follow this path going forward. And the last tariff, the last policy point is then looking at starting the conversations with Eskom. Reviewing some of the existing DECOSA agreements, doesn't look like there's anything tied to time there. As long as the grid connection is in use, it should remain valid. This hasn't been tested in the market, and these discussions haven't begun. But I think obviously there's value to everyone to retaining those grid connections and trying to find a way around projects potentially waiting for congestion. I understand that there's lots of plans in the TDP coming forward, but I think this also provides a nice alternative to projects looking to go through any of these processes. I think I'll end it there, and we can go into questions in the Q&A session. And thanks everyone for participating.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Declan. We will definitely take the questions after our last presentation, but we definitely appreciate the technical options that were portrayed in this session that will offer sound considerations for investors and IPPs as they prepare for the asset end of life. A warm thank you to you. We will now move on to our third and final speaker for today's session. Her name is Rochelle Bloemhof. Rochelle is the Principal Associate in WSP Africa's mine closure team. She has more than 13 years of experience, specialized experience actually, in closure cost estimation and integrated closure planning. She has worked across commodities including coal, copper, and platinum, as well as in power generation, renewables, hydro storage, and industrial sectors. Her expertise spans the full asset life cycle, from decommissioning and rehabilitation to developing long-term closure strategies that are both financially feasible and technically robust. Rochelle leads multidisciplinary teams in designing innovative closure and regeneration solutions, including land use planning, cash flow modeling, and decommissioning roadmaps. Today, she will share cross-sector lessons from mining and closure planning that can inform renewable energy projects. When you're ready, Rochelle.
Great. Thank you so much, and good afternoon. Good morning still. Good morning, colleagues.
Good morning. We can see your presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you so
Thanks.
much. I'm just going to put off my camera to save some bandwidth, but this is me. Yeah, thanks. Okay, perfect. So let's start. So thank you so much again for having me. This is my first webinar with SAWEA, and I'm very excited. And wow, what an incredible lineup of speakers over the past 2 days. I think we can all agree the conversations have been electrifying and so needed. So I'm going to give you a bit of detail or spiel on what closure is. In the case where turbines need to be demolished, due to whatever reason, may it be structural integrity or safety concerns, expiration of leases or permits, or regulatory requirements and environmental responsibilities, or whatever the reason may be. Closure is always an interesting discussion because it's so multifaceted that we often find people talking about it, slightly different aspects of it. So let's have this conversation and see where we land. Okay, so let's start with something deceptively simple: language. The words we use in closure planning: rehabilitation, restoration, reclamation, remediation, decommissioning, or even best practice, sound technical, but they carry emotion. So when people hear closure, they think about job losses, uncertainty, or vulnerability. When communities hear rehabilitation, they might picture grass on a slope. And when regulators hear best practice, they may think about budget overruns. So lack of common language can lead to misunderstanding and conflict among stakeholders. So, for example, what stable is for me, or even the word rehabilitation, what that means for me may be different for you. So, for example, I don't like to use the word best practice because what's best today could be outdated tomorrow, or one person's best might be another's acceptable. So, that's why I like to use the word leading or good practice instead. I think the real risk lies not just in what we do, but how we interpret what we do. Misunderstanding terminology can create huge variations in closure cost estimates and massive gaps in expectations between companies, regulators, and communities. So that's why during every stage of a process, we need to make sure that we are aligned on terminology to avoid any confusion and maintain consistency across disciplines and stakeholders. So now this slides unpack those terms, because how we define rehabilitation, restoration, remediation, or even reclamation shapes how we plan, how we cost, and ultimately how we measure success. So let's start at the top: ecosystem restoration. This is the gold standard: halting and reversing degradation to improve biodiversity and ecosystem services. It's basically about the full recovery of function, nature healing itself. Then we have reclamation, so often used in post-mining contexts. It's about converting disturbed land back to useful state, maybe for farming, maybe for grazing, or any other productive use. It might include ecological restoration, but doesn't always aim for a full return to the original ecosystem. Then rehabilitation sits somewhere in between. So it's about reinstating a level of ecosystem productivity or function, stabilizing landforms, managing erosion, and creating conditions where ecosystem services can continue. So it's not about planting grass, it's about setting the stage for something to grow again. Then remediation is more technical. So removing or neutralizing contamination. Think about detoxifying soils or treating polluted water. It's often the prerequisite before restoration or rehabilitation can even begin. Then finally, repurposing. We've heard the word during the last 2 days many times. This one's becoming more relevant for both mining and renewable energy sectors. So it's about finding a new life for the land, maybe solar farms, recreating areas or community spaces. It often overlaps with reclamation, but it's driven by new purpose and value creation. So in South Africa, as the wind turbine fleet begins to age, this distinction is strategic. It's about defining the kind of future we want the land once the blade stops spinning to become. So the words we choose basically sets the expectations. They build trust. They define what success really means. So I heard Mishelle also spoke about this. In mining, we refer to the concept cradle to cradle. So the first cradle reminds us closure planning must begin as early as possible, ideally during exploration, but certainly throughout the front-end loading stage. Then the second cradle represents rebirth. So the mine or the facility or the operation in a new form, reflecting sustainable post-closure land uses. Okay, so this slide illustrates the progression of environmental condition and recovery actions across a mining or industrial landscape. It shows the continuum from minimizing impacts during operations to achieving full ecological restoration. What's powerful about this slide is that it reminds us closure and rehabilitation are not single events. They are a staged process, a journey from impact to regeneration. So if we start on the left, you'll see the environmental conditions begins at the initial stage, then declines through exploration and operational impacts. That's our loss phase. But as we move right, we enter the recovery phase, where the environmental conditions start improving through intentional actions. So the figure visualizes that journey from loss to recovery, showing how every stage has its own objectives and actions. So looking at minimizing impacts, reducing disturbance during explorations and operations. So this is about smart design, and I think Mishelle also touched on this, responsible land use and proactive mitigation before damage begins. Then next is remediation, the technical phase where we make the site safe, stable, and non-polluting. It's all about detoxifying soils, treating water, and stabilizing the land to create a foundation for what comes next. Then comes rehabilitation, repairing the ecosystem function and restabilizing vegetation. This is where we start to see life return again, habitats forming, soil stabilizing, and water cycles rebalancing. And then finally, move into the ecological restoration, where systems become self-sustaining again. So native species return, biodiversity strengthens, and ecosystem functions independently, reaching basically partial and ultimately full recovery. So what should we take from this slide? Closure is not a once-off milestone. It's a gradual, staged process. Early actions, especially minimizing impacts during operations, have the biggest influence on long-term success. And ongoing monitoring and adaptive management are critical to ensure we keep moving toward full recovery. So we've seen in mining and heavy industry that if you leave rehabilitation up until the end, it becomes much more expensive, more complex, and often less successful. So importantly, this framework doesn't just apply to mining, it's equally relevant for the wind energy and renewable infrastructure. Apologies. Great, so let's start with a simple question. How many times have we seen well-intended plans fail? Not because people weren't trying, but because everyone was working in silos. The recyclist says one thing, the developer says another thing, and the regulators have their own view. And in the end, no one is actually really aligned. Dr. Mark again touched on this during the Tuesday Part 1 webinar. That's exactly what we're here to unpack today, is how integration and collaboration can transfer closure or transitioning planning, as I'd like to call it, whether it's for a mine or a wind farm, into something predictable, cost-effective, and socially responsible. So the ICMM, this is a extract from the ICMM, International Council of Mining and Metals, has developed a strong framework for guidance for integrated closure planning, linking land use, social transition, social transition and financial provisioning. So these principles are just as relevant to the renewable energy sector, which is now facing its own end-of-life challenges. So let's start at the beginning. Closure planning, again, I've mentioned it before, is not an afterthought. It's something that starts at design, before construction, before operations. Why? Because early planning allows us to anticipate risks, capture any opportunities, and design our assets for efficient, low-cost closure. Think about it as setting the DNA of sustainability right from the start. Placing materials strategically to reduce future impacts, sequencing topsoil storage to preserve the quality thereof, and designing waste or other residue facilities for long-term stability. I think Mishelle really nicely captured that earlier today. But design thinking goes even further. I think in the renewable energy and infrastructure space, early integration also means designing for a circular future. So, for example, material selection, choosing materials that are recyclable, renewable, or bio-based, reducing future waste and carbon footprints, or design for disassembly, so creating modular, easy to separate components so assets can be dismantled safely and efficiently at the end of life, or standardization and modularity, so using consistent interchangeable parts that make refurbishment and recycling much more practical and cost effective. So there are the same design principles that drive value in both mining and renewables, because when we plan for closure from day one, we reduce the doubler handling, avoid unnecessary disturbances, ground disturbances, and unlock significant long-term cost savings. But integration also doesn't stop at design. It's also about who is involved. So real success happens when developers, regulators, recyclers, financiers, and all communities have a voice. When engagement is continuous and meaningful, closure decisions are better supported and risk of conflict or misalignment shrinks dramatically. So integration across the life of asset is definitely proven in practice. So this is now a mining example, but I think it's really relevant. If you take the BHP operation in Western Australia, by integrating closure principles into their mine design, they reduced the total land disturbance by over 50% and increased void backfilling by more than 60%. How did they do that? By planning haulage routes and waste placements with closure in mind, improving fleet efficiency, cutting rework, and slashing closure cost. Integration really unlocks operational synergies and builds confidence. So this in turn helps everyone, not just engineers, not just the investors, the community stakeholders, but everyone to understand that closure risks are what the closure risks are that needs to be managed, and what can be helped to be identified, what opportunities can be identified through the life cycle. So just to end off with this slide, closure planning is not static. It's a dynamic, iterative, and knowledge-driven process. Plans evolve as we gather new data. We heard that this morning as well. So when closure is embedded in across the life cycle, from feasibility right through decommissioning, it becomes really a strategic opportunity and not just a liability. So start early, collaborate deeply, plan iteratively, and always ask, what legacy do we want to leave behind? Okay, so that was a mouthful, but it matters and we need to talk about it. So now let's talk about closure, stretching decades into the future, and this uncertainty associated with that. So Declan mentioned again the repurposing options and the repowering options. So we all know that wind farms are truly renewable, and if maintained, can extend beyond the original design life of 15 or 30 years. So timeframes can be generational, making it difficult to define clear endpoints or agree on what good enough looks like. That's exactly why closure in the wind energy sector is not just about dismantling turbines, but also defining what comes next. Um, of course, without challenges, not without challenges. So we are being asked to predict that future with sometimes fragmented and incomplete data. So from early stage wind resource assessments to operational maintenance logs, etc. Evolving regulatory frameworks, again, Mishelle touched on that this morning, where environmental compliance, decommissioning obligations, and post-closure land use policies can change over time. Shifting community expectations, where local stakeholders may increasingly demand sustainable land use, renewable integration, or even recreational community spaces. And then climate change and extreme weather, which can also alter site conditions, impact infrastructure, longevity, and redefine environmental performance criteria. So yes, uncertainty is a given. It's not the exception, it's the norm. But how do we beat that odds? Think long term. Treat closure as a strategic investment. Break down the silos. Cross-functional teams drive alignment and shared accountability. Capture the knowledge. Document processes. Document monitoring reports. Hand over insights. Preserve that institutional memory throughout the life of asset. Build adaptive closure models and plans and keep reviewing them. Scenario planning, probabilistic risk analysis let us anticipate that change, not just react to it. Then integrate external trends, factor in climate, regulatory and community shifts to future-proof closure plans. So basically, in short, we are not trying to predict the future perfectly. That's impossible, we know that. We're trying to manage the uncertainty intelligently, align the expectations, and make today's decisions add value tomorrow. So what can we learn from other sectors? Surprisingly, one of the most powerful teachers for wind energy is the mining industry. An industry often seen as the opposite of clean energy, but has decades of experience in closure, rehabilitation, and stakeholder engagement. So if we're smart, we will definitely borrow its best ideas and leave the rest behind. So quick 5 lessons that I would like to just highlight from the mining industry. The first one being the continuous structured planning, plan from day one. So I've already touched a lot on this, but so just in a nutshell, in mining, closure is baked into everyday decision making, from pit design through to waste placement. Why? Because retrofitting a site for post-mining land use is very expensive and often impossible. So wind energy should follow suit. Turbines, solar farms, and battery systems all have finite lifespans. So planning for decommissioning, what happens to the blades, the concrete foundations, cabling should all start from the design stage. Lesson 2, align with policy, even if it's vague at this stage. And I'm talking about closure, in terms of closure obligations, not in terms of what happens to waste. Mishelle already touched on that. Closure. So what happens when wind farms reach the end of their life? Who ensures what the land is restored or repurposed or repowered? The waste is managed safely and the environmental and any social obligations are met. So interestingly, unlike mining, the energy sector doesn't have a detailed prescriptive closure blueprint. So mine closure is tightly regulated under the National Environmental Management Act, financial provisioning regulations, which requires a mine closure plan to have a risk assessment, a closure plan, closure costs associated with that, and even the annual rehabilitation or progressive rehabilitation plan. Each plan monitored, costed, and backed with financial provision. Energy, on the other hand, sits under broader laws like NERSA, NEMA, the Water Act, the Waste Act, permit and license conditions, duty of care, OEME contracts, environmental authorization documents, all which set out environmental obligations, but don't really spell out exactly how closure planning and costs should be calculated or secured. So what do? We build our own structure. We review the environmental documents, authorization documents, the regulatory documents. We scrutinize the OEME and IPP contracts, as these may include any take-back clauses or end-of-life responsibilities. We raise provisional liabilities under the International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS IAS 37, recognizing obligations when they are probable, measurable, and real obligations. So I'll briefly touch on that during the next point. Then lesson number 3, financial provisioning is strategy. So mines set aside funds for rehabilitation and closure. They define post-closure land use, whether it's conservation, agriculture, grazing, or community development. They plan accordingly. So the energy sector should do the same. Decide early what will the land return to nature. Will it return to grazing? Will it be handed back to the farmer, or and become productive farmland again? Or what will it host? Will it host any new renewables post closure? So that decision basically affects everything, from how deep we remove the concrete foundations to the depth of the topsoil we need to replace, and how we manage turbine blades and the haulage and disposal cost that comes within, or recycling cost. And yes, we've all heard it, turbines are a challenge at this stage. So they are made of composite materials, they don't degrade. Waiting until decommissioning to address them is like a mine basically waiting up until closure to start with a first rehab trial when the budget's already gone. So why investing now in recycling technology, repurposing pilots, and circular supply chains? It's much more innovative. It progresses rehabilitation. It spreads cost over the life of asset. It builds capacity, and it shows regulators and communities that we are serious about leaving behind a good legacy. Then lesson number 4, progressive rehabilitation. I won't go into too much detail here now. I've got a whole slide coming up in the next few slides. So I just want to quickly plant a seed here. So mining has learned the hard way. Delaying rehabilitation inflates cost, erodes trust, and invites regulatory trouble. We all know that. Now, wind and solar farms face a different challenge. So unlike mining, where you can actually start rehabilitate disturbed land during operations, renewable infrastructure stays in place right up until the very end. So it doesn't look like reshaping waste dumps or reseeding slopes. It's more looking like operational R&D, so research and development, supply chain innovation, and early stakeholder engagement. So early recycling pilots, every repurposing trial, every community conversation, these are acts of rehabilitation. So I'm going to touch on this during the next slide. So last but not least is lesson 5, early stakeholder engagement, and often. So mining taught us a very hard truth. Ignoring communities and regulators is costly on the environment, on the company's reputation, financially, and the list goes on. So social licenses, the trust and approval for those affected can make or break your closure vision. And once that trust is lost, it's incredibly hard to regain it. So we've seen this happening in the mining sector, where delayed rehabilitation and vague land use plans turn technical success into social erosion. So the wind energy sector must adopt the same mindset. Engage landowners, talk to farmers, include indigenous communities where needed, bring regulators into the room as early as possible, not just for compliance, but for co-creation. Use co-design models to reshape post-closure next land uses together. Create advisory forums for ongoing dialogue. Share progress transparently, not just in reports, but in ways people understand it. This links back to the terminology in my first slide. Keep feedback loops active, because conditions change and so do expectations. I think, and we've also heard it this morning, that the wind energy sector has a chance to do this differently. So smaller footprints, lower disruptions, yes, but that doesn't mean smaller responsibility though. Then, I need to speed up now. So what drives the cost for wind farm decommissioning? So I'm just going to quickly go through this slide. So turbine dismantling and transport. So I'm going to talk to this on an overview of the closure costing estimates that we do for the wind energy sector. So in the case of turbines, specialized cranes, skilled crews, oversized logistics, they aren't just expensive, they are site specific. So remote locations, meaning longer travel times, increased kilometers, further hauling distances, higher fuel cost, and complex access planning. Foundations removal, so each turbine sits on hundreds of cubic meters of reinforced concrete, as you can see on the picture over there. So the first one is actually what we see on above slab level, and the second picture is what's actually going on underneath the ground. So breaking this up, extracting the rebar, regrading the site, it's labor intensive and very, very costly. And the depth of the removal depends entirely on what happens next. If the land returns to agriculture, we may need to remove the concrete down to 1 meter, just so farming equipment doesn't hit it. And the deeper you go, the higher the cost, the more expensive your liability ends up. Substation and cabling decommissioning often stretches across kilometers of underground infrastructure with hazardous materials such as oils in the gearboxes and transformers that we need to manage. Blade disposal, this is the elephant in the room. We work very closely with a company called Jet Demolition, one of South Africa's most reputable demolition contractors, and they've confirmed that what we actually already suspected is that there's no elegant solution yet. And we've heard that again. Mishelle clearly stated this morning there won't be any disposal sites for these. So for now, at least, the approach should be to downsize these blades on site and haul it to a recycling facility. The only concern being is what do we allow for our closure cost estimates at this stage? Because remember, we need to allow for closure cost estimates in terms of financial accounting purposes or in whatever the purpose may be. And we need to have a closure vision and a closure scenario to base that closure cost estimate on. So what do we cost for? Do we cost for recycling? Do we cost for a disposal? What do we cost for? So that brings again another round of uncertainty and very high cost allocations, just to be more on the conservative side to ensure that we cover basically everything. So what is the alternative? We need innovation. We need investment in blade recycling technologies. We need repurposing pilots. Again, Mark and Thijs mentioned a few options on Tuesday. And we need policies to support, accelerate these solutions before the problem becomes unmanageable. Mishelle touched again on this this morning. So can we recycle anything? Yes, definitely, but selectively. So steel, copper, concrete, these can all be recovered or reused. Blades, I've touched on that, still remains elusive. However, in South Africa, the volatility of the scrap metal prices adds another layer of uncertainty. So fluctuating market demands, transport costs, and export regulations can dramatically affect the viability of recycling. So sometimes turning what looks like a revenue stream on paper into cost liability in practice. That's why early R&D during operations is so important. So how do we make financial provisioning? What are the mechanisms for it? So we've got trust funds in the mining sector, and I'm sure will be the same for the wind energy sector. So we've got trust funds that basically ring fence the accounts for rehabilitation. Then we've got guarantees, bank or corporate guarantees to regulators, and then closure bonds. So similar to mining, ensuring funds are available even if the operator becomes insolvent. And I've also heard about insurance coverage. I'm not too familiar with that, but I think it's where operators are bundling environmental liability and dismantling costs into insurance products. Then moving on. Okay, so now we've unpacked the drivers for closure costs, but let's quickly talk about something even more strategic, and that's the land itself. So whether it's a mine or a solar farm or a wind farm, the land is always temporary. So we always talk about the temporary land use. Wind farms, for instance, may dominate a landscape for 20, 25, or even 30 years, or beyond that, but they're never permanent. So here in South Africa, most wind farms unfortunately sit on leased land farm or farmland. So this means one day when the turbine stops spinning, the land needs to return to the farmer. So there aren't really any next land use opportunities or regeneration opportunities available if that is the case in the lease agreement. So here's the million-dollar question. What conditions should the land be in when it goes back? Because how we answer that question doesn't just affect ecology, it drives every financial decision, like I've mentioned before, that we make today. So implications for financial provisioning and land use, the moment we decide that land must return to productive agriculture, everything changes, from how we place the access roads and turbines, to how we handle topsoil compaction and drainage, to the depth that we need to remove the concrete foundations. We can't just leave it to chance. Every operational decision influences the final cost. So let's quickly look at the land capability classification as a guide. So you'll see there's class 1 right up until class 8 or class 9, sorry, class 7. So class 1, supporting the intensive cultivation, whereas class 4 looking at which is better for grazing, and the last 2 or 3 is only viable for wilderness. So the challenges in the wind farms are often on class 1, which is primary agricultural farmland zones. So when turbines are decommissioned, the land must be restored to its original capability. So that basically means removing or repurposing foundations and access roads carefully, restoring compacted soils and maintain soil fertility, correcting topography and drainage, so farming is viable again. And like in mining, the cost of rehabilitation isn't fixed. It's driven by what we intend the next land use need to become. So returning land to arable farming is much more expensive than converting it to grazing or even conservation and wilderness. Then just to link it back to the financial provisioning again, so we need to align the land capability, know what the soil is, the water, and the topography before construction. Responsive to operational impacts, track how roads, turbines, and foundations will affect the land, and then guided by early agreements with landowners, co-create that expectations for post-closure land use. Think of every operational choice as a vote for the future land. So basically, material placement, roads and paths must be placed to avoid any disrupting water flow or soil structures, soil preservation, infrastructure retention. So some elements like the roads or the fences may remain if they are supporting future farming or community use. So just to end off this slide, the key lesson from mining is simple. Plan for the land use from day one. Early engagement with farmers and stakeholders guides operational decisions, ensure financial provisioning is accurate, and transforms closure into a strategic investment. Okay, so now we've talked about cost and land use. Let's shift our focus to how we can manage closure proactively. So this is where progressive rehabilitation comes in. So unlike mining, as I mentioned before, we can rehabilitate disturbed lands during operations. It's very difficult and a unique challenge for the wind energy sector where the infrastructure remains in place up until closure. So what does progressive rehabilitation look like in the wind energy sector? So first one, research and development into recycling, repurposing. Exploit every pilot project testing composite blade recycling, gearbox reuse, or PV panel repurposing is essential act for progressive rehabilitation. So why? Because these pilots spread the cost across the life cycle instead of concentrating all costs at the end. Capture knowledge, so it structures data from trials, feeds into adaptive closure scenario-based closure plans, and it reduces the uncertainty that we have in closure planning, which allows the regulators, investors, and operators to understand the possible outcomes. So each small-scale pilot reduces the unknowns in your costing model, allowing for more accurate provisioning and lower risk contingencies. And then we also have establishing operational supply chains. Progressive rehabilitation isn't only the R&D, it's also about logistics. So planning how these components can be transported and processed while operations are ongoing reduces the shock when the full-scale decommissioning arrives. Mishelle also iterated on that this morning. And then incremental knowledge building. Every pilot generates data on recycling efficiency, costs, environmental performance, and this feeds directly into your, again, financial models. So in short, knowledge is power. The progressive rehab is the mechanism to capture it before it's too late. Then lastly, we have the regulatory and community confidence. So a progressive initiative sends a clear message. The operator is really taking closure seriously. So communities see tangible actions towards responsible closures, and it also demonstrates proactive risk management and responsible planning. So then my second last slide is, I'm not going to say too much on this slide, as I think we've already touched on this subject a lot during the last 2 days. But the key here is that rehabilitation is a powerful catalyst for local development. When done thoughtfully, it can unlock long-term value for communities, ecosystems, and economy. Restored land can do much more than just recover. It can recreate. So it can support agriculture, enable conservation, or even repurpose for renewable energy purposes. So of course, none of this happens without trust. That means transparent communication, shared ownership of outcomes, and long-term stewardship with communities where they feel empowered to take care of the environment for the benefit from the land they actually helped restored. So that's why rehabilitation planning must be flexible, forward-looking, and inclusive for everyone. Then just to end off my last slide, to summarize, good closure doesn't mean perfect closure. It's about continuous improvement, realistic objectives, and collaborative planning that balances technical feasibility, community expectation, and long-term stewardship. Whether it's a mine, a wind farm, or solar infrastructure, the way we approach closure today shapes the landscape, communities, and economies of tomorrow. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but just looking, I just quickly want to touch on, not all infrastructure disappears at the end of the project. There are some, such as roads, substation, grid connections, that can become valuable assets for the community or industry post-closure. Then we have adaptive and transparent planning. Closure planning must be dynamic and adaptive. We've got circular economy and innovation. So closure also presents or represents an opportunity for innovation and circular economy practices. So by treating closure as a design challenge rather than a cost burden, we can unlock both environmental and economic value. Then I think this is a very important one. Treat closure as a business case. Ultimately, progressive rehabilitation, like I said, spread costs and reduces future liability. So invest as early as possible. Resource recovery generates new value streams. Community integration builds trust and social licenses. Early integrated planning transforms closure from a risk into a legacy of resilience and opportunity. And then I just want to leave you with this. So design and operational phases are the best opportunities to prevent long-term impacts. If closure isn't considered from the start, critical opportunities are lost. So closure planning should occur continuously with constant feedback loops between planning and on-the-ground execution. Each action provides learning that reduces uncertainty, refines future work, and supports the iterative, adaptive, and continuous improvement process throughout the life of the operation. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to leave it open to questions. I'm going to hand back to Mafiwa. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. That was such a lovely and excellent contribution from your end. I think your cross-sector experience really comes through here, and it really highlights the lessons that we can get from mining and industrial closure that can guide our renewable energy sector and the wind sector as well to plan better circular closure. Thank you so much. Colleagues on the line, I am aware that we are a little over time, but I'd just like to ask for 5 minutes, if we can borrow an extra 5 minutes for everyone on the call, just to have a quick Q&A. But before we do that, I just want to take this time to thank our speakers once again for such wonderful and insightful presentations. Also noting that Declan actually was one of our own here at SAWEA, and it's just we were proud to see his growth coming across there from the other side. Well done, Declan, and thank you again to Mishelle, who showed us a full circle moment from your interactions with us through Windaba as well. And we hope to see you at this year's Windaba. And to Rochelle, we can guarantee that this is the first of many interactions with SAWEA. And we want to thank you again for your time and expertise. I will hand over to my colleague Vincent to facilitate a Q&A for us, noting that we have a few minutes left. Thank you. Vincent?
Thank you, Mafiwa. Mishelle, maybe just the first question that came in, the scope for the DFFE Waste Directorate to maybe extend their footprint beyond Windaba as well as SAWEA. I'm aware these regulations are available on some of the websites. Maybe if there's a hyperlink you can drop or send to us that we can include in the mailer that's going out, as well as if you'd like to share that now briefly just with where everyone can access some of the key documents and discuss the roadshows that the DFFE Waste Directorate also does.
Thanks, Vincent, and thank you for the question, Corne. Yes, we maybe what I should say is that all of the information that is being sought is at the South African Waste Information Centre, which is a website which is the link to the DFFE website. I will share that link with you. It's very easy to access. All of the documents, regulatory and performance related, is there. We are having roadshows across the country as well. There's one in Cape Town, I think, on the 14th of November, and then we have others across the country. So we do want to share this knowledge, share our direction with everybody, so that we could, as Rochelle indicated earlier, nicely put, is co-create, because we can't walk this journey alone. We will not, because we will not succeed. And so partnerships with the sector and addressing the deficiencies is what we need to do together to get us to the other side. Thanks, Vincent.
Thank you, Mishelle. Then just a question to Declan. So Declan, as an IPP, what feasibility studies need to start at the halfway mark of a wind farm? And briefly, what inspections and assessments are required?
So at a high level, I would say that inspections, turbine walkdowns should be completed at each turbine, and we'll need to complete an analysis just of the turbine. So I think similar to an operational assessment that is sent to lenders, I think an operational assessment will need to be completed with more detail focused on any potential issues and how they can be resolved going forward. And then I think with regards to feasibility studies, it'll be a feasibility study for all of the options discussed would have to be reviewed, and an analysis would have to be completed. So you'd have to do a comparative feasibility study of each of the options, and then the costs will have to be provided, and financial analysis will have to be completed on that separately. So it will vary from project to project and on the instructions based on the individual IPPs. But if anyone would like to discuss that more, I can drop my email address into the chat, and we can discuss that in some more detail.
Thank you, Declan. Last question would be to Rochelle. Rochelle, what local community empowerment or employment options, rather, are there in closure involvement? And have you, from your experience, seen any wins and positive stories emanating from that?
Great question. Thanks, Vincent. Typically in the mining industry, we try to get the communities involved during operations to start establishing those business partnerships with the community to be sustainable even after closure, when the mines close and that economy pathway gets taken away. So we try to create the nurseries within the mining industry and get the communities involved to run those nurseries. So planted the rehabilitation seeds on the mine residue facilities, and get them involved and self-sustaining through that process. But there's actually quite a few ways local communities can get involved during closure. So people can work directly on rehabilitation. So like I've mentioned, running nurseries, planting, shaping the land, managing erosion, or even help monitoring water, soil, and biodiversity. So there are a lot of opportunities to support these roles. But I haven't seen anything actually happening within the wind energy sector, just because it's quite static during operations, where mining is more dynamic, where you can actually implement some of those. And because wind farms are situated on farmlands, it's very difficult to get communities involved in private owned land. So it's really about creating that meaningful, lasting opportunities for the community, and not just short-term jobs every now and then. So there's definitely opportunity and ways for improving that going forward. So again, another gap I think we need to work on. Did I answer the question?
Thank you, Rochelle.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the speakers for your valued contributions. Back to Mafiwa.
Thank you, colleagues. I just want to thank everybody on the call for your time today as part 2 of our 2-part series of Turbine Talks comes to a close. I think that together with the insights we got, the international perspectives from part 1 and today's local insights have given us a full picture on this topic, from regulation and compliance to engineering, financing, and closure practices. On behalf of SAWEA, we would like to thank you for joining us and engaging in this important series. As just another reminder to those who have asked, Part 1 and Part 2 recordings will be available on SAWEA's YouTube channel, and presentations from today and from Tuesday will be shared with you in our closeout email. We look forward to engaging in this conversation further on other SAWEA platforms and seeing you at Windaba on the 21st to 23rd of October. That's next week in Cape Town. I wish you all a productive week ahead, and thank you once more for joining.
Thank you.
Have a good day, colleagues. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.